Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and if you visit umbrex.com and click on the Unleashed tab, you can sign up for the weekly email where you'll get notified of every episode of this daily show, tell you all a summary of each episode so you can figure out which ones you want to listen to. I'm really excited. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I'm here today with my friend Rick Denton, who is the managing principal of EX for CX. I'll let him tell you what that means. Rick is an expert on customer experience. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. I'm really excited to be on the show today.
All right, Rick, so first thing is, what's EX for CX? And you told me before the show we started recording that there's I'd like to hear your definition of customer experience. So let's go those things.
Yeah, so EX for CX stands for execution for customer experience. And the genesis behind it is weaving together that outside in of a customer focus with the inside out of a process and operations focus to create great experiences for every customer every time. And that kind of gets at what we were talking about earlier, right? So customer experience is saying that you work in customer experience is almost like saying, hey, I'm a designer. Well, are you a graphic designer? Are you an industrial designer? Do you do web design? Um, do you do city planning design, right? So it's all over the map, and customer experience is sort of that same way. I find that the work that I tend to focus on is helping companies and clients listen to customers and then act on it. And that's that execution for customer experience idea. And creating that sense of a total voice of the customer program so that you are actively, I'll say it again, listening to that customer and then doing something about it. Too often we see companies claim to listen or claim to be customer centric, and yet they might listen, but they don't do anything with it. And it is certainly something that's been a lot of fun. It obviously speaks right to my heart in that I kind of like humans. And so customer experience is all about humanity. And I find it really enjoyable to help companies create that better customer experiences for the humans that are a part of that experience. And then fundamentally also use that to help create the business financial goals that they have in mind.
Now, Rick, you have a new podcast out, and I'll tell listeners that tomorrow's episode of Unleashed, we're going to play one of Rick's episodes. Tell us about your new show, what listeners can look forward to tomorrow on this show, or they can go right now and check out your show and subscribe. Tell us about your new podcast.
Well, thanks, Will. Yeah, it's a CX passport, and it weaves together two of my loves, and that is the customer experience that I was describing, but then also travel. I have a bit of a silly tagline that I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. And so launch this podcast to do just that, to have a conversation with interesting people. They might be inside of the customer experience domain, or they might just be people, humans, just like humans that I was describing earlier, who have a perspective on customer experience. And then we also weave together a little bit of travel talk in there. Sometimes it relates to customer experience. Other times I just get to hear there was an episode that's been recorded, be released here in a few weeks. Talking to somebody about what was it like to travel for an entire year and a half, and what did that look like? So it's been a lot of fun, as you have many hundreds of episodes under your belt can attest to. It's a lot of learning, but it certainly creates a lot of interesting conversations with interesting people, and I have absolutely enjoyed it.
I love that mix of mixing in the travel piece because I definitely would say that some of my most memorable meals have been while traveling, and it's the newness of it, it's the adventure of it, it's new ingredients, it's new locations, it's new recipes and tastes and sights and sound that all just make it more powerful, memorable. And maybe you're working up an appetite where you're walking around some strange city or countryside. So I'm really psyched for your show, and I'm psyched to replay one of your episodes tomorrow. So tune in for that, or if you're just pause this episode right now and go subscribe to CX Passport on any major player of podcasts. Let's talk a little bit about your work, Rick. Give us an example of one of the types of projects that you work on as customer experience.
Yeah, so let me talk about kind of a recent one. There's several stories out there, but one of the recent clients, and what was most satisfying about this, let me set the stage a little bit, is that this was a client that already had the customer at their heart. They knew they wanted to do right by the customer. They felt like that they could do better by the customer. They just needed someone to sort of help guide them on what that meant. And that's where focusing on that total voice of the customer approach really cemented for them. So this was, I don't want to call them a new company, but they haven't been in business for decades. And what they needed to get more seasoned at was how do they establish this program where they can systematically listen to the customer and then act upon it. And what was particularly satisfying is that this is a type of business where the customer's relationship with the company is about a 3 to 5 year relationship. But at any moment, the customer can leave. And that's sort of true of a lot of the brand and customer relationships, is that there's not this legal requirement that they stay with you, be that a SaaS product, or it could be a retail product, or it could be a financial services product. And what they realized was if customers stayed with them for over 3 months, 90 days, then they'd stay with them for the life of the program. And the customer would get the full benefit of the program, right? This isn't just about extracting value from the customer. It's about providing value to the customer. And they needed a better way of knowing, why are we seeing this cancellation in the first 90 days? What are the factors behind it? What is it that in this early customer success period, where are we falling short on the customer's expectation? So going in and helping them, one, just ascertain, hey, what does your current state of customer experience, voice of the customer look like? And then what can we do to listen to those customers in those first 90 days, understand what it is, and then come up with some very simple solutions to help address those customers' needs. And I'll speak of one, and it's a lot of companies, and you may have felt this as a customer sometimes. There's a lot of energy that a company puts into getting you to sign up as a customer. And then once you've signed up, sometimes you feel ghosted. And that's what a lot of these customers were feeling, is that, great, you spent all this energy to create an environment where I wanted to join your company, and then I didn't hear from you for 6 months. So yeah, after 3 months, I'm done. You're silent. I'm out. And so we created some modes on how we can reach out to the customer in a way that that customer wanted to be reached out to. How can we provide information to them that's relevant to them at that point to create that stickiness of that relationship? But all that comes back to fundamentally, hey, are you listening to the customer, and then what are you doing about it? So you may hear me repeat that phrase a lot, but that listen and act is so important to customer experience and getting that right.
When we started, you mentioned that it's sort of like saying someone is a designer, that there's lots of different varieties of it. When we have the broad term, sort of someone who works on customer experience, walk us through a bit of a taxonomy of the different parts of customer experience, or the different stages. So one of it sounds like is voice of the customer, or understanding the customer's perspective. But what are the full range of functions that customer experience includes?
I'm going to probably fall short for giving you the full range because uh, describing that might actually go beyond even the areas that I know, because just as unique as individual customers are, so is probably the approach to customer experience. With that caveat in place, though, I think a lot of the areas that people think of when they think of customer experience overall, I describe some of the human elements, the voice of the customer, and then customer obsessed culture is another big one that I think there's some good stories we can talk about there. But another area of customer experience is that UX, that user experience side of it. So how does the user's digital experience, their web experience, their app experience, whatever that might look like, what does that look like? Because those product teams, the product teams that are getting it right, really have the customer at the heart of their design. So that customer centered design or design led thinking, all of those areas, that's where you see a lot of that customer experience influence in the technology space. I think another area that you hear that's related to the customer experience world is customer success or customer service. And it's funny, Will, you and I were talking about this. I was just on a call with somebody earlier this morning, and we actually had a chuckle about how there's a lot of effort in the customer experience world invested in finding definitions and creating boundaries. Well, you're a customer success person, I'm a customer experience person, those sorts of things, when really fundamentally we're just trying to deliver an ideal outcome for the customer. So even I'm kind of chuckling when I mention customer success as a discipline inside of customer experience. But those are areas that are focused on, hey, the sale has been made, how do we create a successful relationship between the customer and the brand or the product that they have purchased? And that's where customer success sits. And then customer service is what many of us actually think customer experience is or thought customer experience is. And that is, okay, I've received a product or I'm engaging with a brand. What are the service elements that I need? So, as in the retail store, when we're back in retail stores, how am I engaging with the store associate? Or when I call into a call center and when I engage on a chat or in social media, what is my what is the customer service element of customer experience, and how does that improve my overall relationship with the brand?
Talk to me about the different tools that are used in the whole world of customer experience. So, I imagine one of them is just interviews, sort of a voice of the customer interview. Another one might be mapping out a customer journey. But there's probably much broader range than that. Talk to me about some of the tools that you often turn to.
Yeah, you've described what I would say are the two biggest, right? If you started and stopped there, you would have you, kind of like you need your screwdriver and your hammer in your toolbox, but there's a whole lot of other things you could put in there. But you've got your screwdriver and your hammer, you can do most of your repairs. And that same thing. So journey mapping and understanding the relationship of the customer from pre-customer to while they are as a customer, and then in some situations post-customer, and how you renew that relationship with them. I think tools too. One of the things that's important, I do want to kind of talk about, you talk about interviews, but a voice of the customer tool is incredibly important. And now a lot of folks think voice of the customer is the tool. So these survey tools that exist, and there's a whole suite of brands from the big brands to small upstart players that are out there.
Well, talk to me about some of those. Like, what are some of
Oh,
the
okay.
big players that
Yeah,
we
yeah,
should
okay.
that I should be aware of?
So Medallion Qualtrics, I think, are the two biggest players that are out there, right? Those are the big names that folks almost always turn to when they think of voice of the customer tools. They have an incredible suite of how they can capture the customer's voice. And notice I keep saying customer's voice rather than surveys or that kind of stuff. Surveys are vitally important, but there's other mechanisms. There's video interviews, there's social media intake, there are listening to the calls or the chats that come into your customer contact center and discerning customer emotion and customer sentiment from there. Medallion Qualtrics do a great job of that. Right. Then there's some, to say small, I think technically smaller is the correct word, but I'm not saying necessarily under indexed on the capabilities. But there's a great company that I know out of Turkey called Alterna CX that has a phenomenal tool in that regard. And then another company that I know, Hello Customer, out of Belgium, that has a really great suite of taking that customer input in. And then all of what I just described, if you just take the customer input in, great, that's nifty. But it's then going back to listen and act. What do you do with it? And the do with it, these tools really help unlock from the analytics perspective. So those analytics will help you discern what are the overarching themes that exist in the customer verbatim, both the promoters and the detractors. What are perhaps different external factors? So my goodness, on Tuesdays we are incredibly disappointing all of our customers. What's happening on Tuesdays? There's also another kind of tool out there that's, I'm finding it interesting. I don't want to say it's an upstart. It's been out for a while, but EMRAYS, EMRAYS. This really gets into kind of emotional sentiment, really almost in an AI-ish way, getting at what is the customer feeling and thinking based off of the voice that they're providing to you. So that kind of suite of tools that I'm describing, to me, those voice of the customer tools are absolutely foundational. It's almost impossible. I'll say almost impossible to run a true listen and act total voice of the customer program without a tool in place.
What's the difference between customer experience and customer insights?
You're taking me back to the definition discussion that I had earlier, but I'd say customer insights is a piece of developing customer experience. So if we're talking about an organizational group, customer insights is about understanding what the customer is thinking, understanding how the customer might behave, predicting how the customer might act in the future. That's a vital important of creating customer experience. But if you just stopped at customer insights, then you would really know a lot about your customer, but you wouldn't have done a lot about your customer. And so customer insights helps influence the creation of a great customer experience.
So let's say that we have some people that are saying, okay, I want to be a customer experience consultant. What are the types of projects that a customer experience consultant might do? So I imagine
Yeah.
one of them, I'll start us off. One of them might be, oh, our retention is down. We need to figure out what's going on and improve customer retention. So maybe that's a project. What are some other project types, or challenge that one if I'm off base on my very first step.
No, you're spot on there. You are absolutely spot on. So customer retention, customer churn, how do we reduce that? Clearly you're hearing sort of my influence, my experience, my bias. I approach that by talking about a total voice of the customer program. Another, another thread of that, and so that is a type of project going in, understanding how do you listen to the customer today, and then what are the programs that you want to do to act upon that, kind of what we talked about earlier. Another area that I'm seeing a lot more of, which is encouraging to me, is this culture element of it. So we hear plenty of people talking about EQ. We hear plenty of people talking about empathy, and plenty of people talking about, how can we connect with our customers in such a way that it helps us organically create great experiences. And that's that customer obsessed culture type piece of work. And so going in, that's getting at more hearts and minds type work. And so how do you hire? Let's say I'm going in and consulting for a company for that. How do you hire for the type of customer experience, customer focused and customer centricity? How do you coach? How do you performance management to that? But then also in a more exciting sort of way, how do you celebrate? How do you inspire your organization? One of the things that I found particularly helpful in projects where you're trying to create that customer obsessed culture is bring the customer, well, if you can physically do it, great, but bring the customer's story into your company. It is amazing how emotional the impact of story can be on an organization. So creating that customer obsessed culture a lot of times comes from that. I mean, you think about a home equity business, that sounds pretty sterile, right? Go out, get loan, get funding for whatever you need. The emotion that we were able to unlock at a prior experience that I had by using customer story helped really change how that organization approached their entire view towards the customer. So they talked about, it used to be I worked 10 folders in a day, and now they talk about how many families they helped in a day. There is a beautiful story of someone who was able to use home equity to unlock a particular medical treatment for a family member who didn't have the opportunity to have that medical treatment without this. Those are the kind of stories that help create that customer success culture. Now, I may have deviated a little bit from the question that you said, but those are the kind of projects, those are the kind of areas where I've seen some real impact with companies. I'll give you a third one, Will, and that is going back to that UX. Sometimes companies are saying, hey, we just want to improve kind of our overall customer experience when it comes to our digital space. So how can we improve our product? How can we improve how we represent ourselves externally to the customer? And that is another area that folks who are saying, yeah, I want to do the CX consulting thing. That's another area that has plenty of fertile ground for companies to help improve their product and their UX as well.
Okay. Um, and then I imagine there'd be, I mean, just logically, I imagine there'd be some things like customer acquisition. Like, is there some problem with the customer experience right up front when they're testing the the product, or maybe being able to have a higher level of customer experience so that you can, um, charge a higher
Yeah.
price, right? And there's
Well,
there's B2B as well. You could talk to me about B2B a little bit as well, and as how B2B customer experience.
so you'll hear a recurring theme of mine, and it's the humanity aspect of it. And I have actually written a blog about this. And B2B is fundamentally, the first B is the collection of your humans, and the second B is the collection of their humans. So fundamentally, you're still dealing with a human to human interaction. It's just more of a collective type environment. And so it still comes down to the same fundamentals of how are you listening to your customer, even if your customer is a B and that business is still a collection of humans. And what is it that you're doing to advance those humans' needs, their wishes, their desires? Where it gets a little different in B2B is if you think in a B2C situation, the customer in that is they're spending, quote, their money on their needs. In a B2B situation, you might have someone, let's say it's a supply manager or it's some other type. Well, their needs aren't necessarily they need your product supplied to them. Their needs are, I want to do something so well in my company that I get promoted, I get a raise, I get accolades inside my company. And so, how are you helping them advance their missions inside that business relationship is where it gets a little different than B2C. But fundamentally, it's still understanding what are the needs, the wants, the behaviors, the emotions of the humans on the other side of that B2B equation.
Hmm. A
I
while.
do like what you said.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Will. I do like what you said about customer acquisition, and that is incredibly important. I tend not to think about it because it's overall just part of the overall customer experience suite. But when you talk about conversion and when you talk about how when customers enter your sales funnel, what is the experience? I'll give you something that's a little bit related but slightly different. Customer experience often can also be talked about in candidate experience. Now, this is clearly a big departure from the overall customer experience, but good companies spend a lot of time thinking about what is their candidate experience, thinking of that funnel. So, talent inbound to their company,
Recruiting, we're
how are
talking
they
about. Yeah.
creating a great experience for the candidate, which then in turn highlights what is likely to be their employee experience, which then that opens up another thread, obviously, of employee experience because you can't create a better customer experience than you do an employee experience. So this whole swath of what experience and experience management, customer experience, employee experience, candidate experience, there's a lot of fertile ground out there. So going back to what you said about somebody who is interested in that business, there's a lot of areas to explore and a lot of areas to bring some impact.
Tell me about any cases you can recall of some finding that you had that was really surprising to your clients. You know, some that something that you learned from their customers that when you told the clients like this is what customers are experiencing, the client was like, I can't. Holy smokes, we got to fix that right away.
Um, Boy, there's two stories that came to mind really quickly. One's a bit of a twist on what you said. Let me go with the straight line answer there, and that is, you know, there was a situation. I've got to try to decouple how I say this because I can't talk about the specifics of it. But imagine that you're delivering a particular service, and that service also requires a third party to deliver a portion of that service. And the company that was responsible for the overall delivery of service, thought, okay, we're doing a great job. We're doing just fine. We are doing what we need to do. But then when we actually listened to the customers were livid about the way this third party element of the service delivery was being provided. And I wish I could be more specific. I can't, but the way that was being provided was something that officially the main company couldn't control. From a regulation perspective, they weren't allowed to really control that. And so before getting the voice of the customer, they were very hands off. Hey, we can't talk about it. We can't do anything in that space. Sorry, that's something that's untouchable. Instead, by listening to the customer, they were able then to bring that input back to themselves. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is what's destroying our overall perception of customer experience. And then they provided that same voice of the customer to that third party, and that third party then had their same eyes opened and were able to improve that. And so that was a bit of a surprise from an insight perspective that it was this third party that was absolutely destroying their overall experience because they had taken such a space of ignoring it. If I could answer that with a bit of a departure, a bit of a twist, Will,
Sure.
I'm going to talk about employee experience a little bit. And we were listening to call, and we could talk about call listening as being one of the most valuable tools, by the way, of just listening to calls. And we were listening to a call once, and it went a little bit like this. And someone had called in and said, hey, look, I'm really sorry. I needed to get you those documents. I know you've been telling me I had to get those documents to you by Friday, but my uncle just passed away. And we were dealing with the funeral associated with that. And just, I was really close to him. And I'm just sorry, but I'll try to get the documents as quickly as I can. There was silence on the phone. And the agent said, All right, well, if you can just get those documents to us by Tuesday, we'll be fine. All of us, I mean, yeah, I wish we were on video here. We just gasped. Oh my gosh, how could this person do this? And we knew this person. It was a small enough company. We knew who this was. This agent was not a bad person. They weren't mean. They weren't cold. And so over time, and you bring them into a conversation like, hey, what happened? And the agent said, well, y'all trained me that I had to be professional, right? And the insight just went off in our heads of, oh my gosh, somehow we have trained an entire suite of agents to be, air quotes here, professional, but we've told them that professional does not mean human, that you can't be human and professional at the same time. And so that was an example of an insight that blew our minds and blew the client's mind of, wait a second, we have created this army of robots because we said they had to be professional, when really we need to teach them how to be empathetic, or allow them, forget teach, allow them to be empathetic, allow them to be the humans that they are on the phone and build those beautiful connections with them, with their customers. And that unlocked a significant amount, like that specific, we almost talk about that story as the muse of our customer obsessed culture journey that we went on. That unlocked a lot of what we were trying to do in the creation of that customer obsessed culture.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, compelling moment of insight. Like
It,
the
it,
death,
it, it,
the death of your loved
you
one is duly noted. Oh
Yeah,
God.
that might have been even colder, my
Oh my
goodness.
God.
But it was, I mean, it was a grass. I mean, we were clutching our pearls, we're gasping at the table, people are falling out of chairs because it was really so shocking. But it's an example of two of, don't just assume that the employee is a bad. Thank goodness we knew the person, and it wasn't. I sincerely would say this was not the employee's fault.
Hmm.
This was the company's fault for not equipping and training and permitting and empowering the agent to be the human that that agent was.
Yeah. And I guess another aspect of the whole customer experience is leaving a company. Like if you're trying to cancel a subscription, that's that's an important part. I mean, some companies like I recently canceled my subscription with the Wall Street Journal. Right, I love the journal; it's great, but I just had taken this vow. Okay, I'm not reading the news for a while, so
Mm,
I canceled it, and they just really make it difficult. Everything else you can do online, you can subscribe online, but if you want to cancel, you have to call in to a person during business hours and like wait on hold, and then say, yeah, I want to cancel. You could obviously easily do it online, but they're trying to get you to not cancel, which maybe is good in the short term for them, where it makes people stay on for another couple months, but it also teaches people like don't ever subscribe again, don't ever resubscribe
right,
because you're gonna have to go through this pain again. Where if they made it
right.
really painless to just pause and then to restart, it might be better for them longer term. So I don't know if you have thoughts there about just sort of making people's last interaction with you a positive one, rather than friction filled.
I was just listening to a podcast 2 days ago. Prof G,
Oh yeah,
Professor
Scott
G, Prof
Galloway.
G,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Well, his podcast, and it's not a customer experience podcast, but it happened to have a call in about NPS. And one of the things that he was talking about in this call in section was the last moments of the relationship between the customer and the brand, or whatever that relationship is, are the ones that over index the influence in the customer's perception of that brand. And so in your case, the cancel story, but he even talked about how airports are the entrance and the exit for many people for a region, or people coming from country to country, or think about the hotel check-in or check-out experience, or airlines. We won't talk about that. They're not really bastions of customer experience, but that same thing. It's the last moments that really cement what your perception of the overall brand was. And so take your cancel example, same exact thing. Why would I, if you had a decades long positive relationship with the Wall Street Journal, why would I try to poison that by trapping you and making you fight to get out of this relationship? Whereas what I could do is make it as customer friendly as possible. Thank you for your valued interaction with us, whether it's Wall Street Journal, whatever that relationship with the brand is. Provide a reason why, come back anytime, what that might look like, keep you in some sort of outreach kind of component, and make it this positive relationship that you walk away from the Wall Street Journal going, oh gosh, yeah, it wasn't the right thing for me then, but I sure like them. And 6 months from now, when you want to access that type of information again, you'll be very warm to going back to them. Whereas now, you are telling the story that tells me you're probably not going back to them anytime soon. Even if you had a compelling need to get that kind of information, you'd probably source it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So those last moments are surprisingly impactful, and it's such an old school way of thinking to say, "Yeah, I'm going to try to chain somebody to my company." What's the value in that? If they don't love you enough to stay, chaining them is not going to improve that relationship anymore.
If you love someone, set them free.
There you go.
So, Rick, this has been a great conversation. Tell us where we can find out more about you and your firm online.
Yeah, head over to EX4, the number 4, CX.com, execution for customerexperience.com, or if you want to just access the podcast straight up, it's cxpassport.com, and check out the site and get a little sense of the approach to execution for customer experience.
And of course, we will include those links in the show notes. And Rick, I hope that you've had a good experience on this show. It was great having you.
My last 5 minutes were wonderful, Will. Thank you. I have a positive impression of the brand.
All right. Thanks a lot. Great having you, Rick. Bye.
Bye.